Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Hey guys, welcome, End of Dragons Daily 94. This is going to be one of those newsy type parts. It's going to be really kind of weird actually. I want a bit of feedback from you guys on how you take this one. The devs put up a post talking a little bit about lore, talking a little bit about world building, and actually something that existed in Guild Wars 1's Cantha during the Factions campaign and how they're moving it into the sequel. That is the written language of the Canthan continent. So that's what we'll be talking about today. It's kind of new information, it's sort of a newsy part, and it's also largely going to be me reading from a blog post. So I sometimes do videos like this, I'm never quite sure how I feel about them, especially because on this, I mean, everything we're going to be reading is very interesting, but I'm not sure how many unique takes I really have here. Nonetheless, I did want to do news in End of Dragons Daily, so let's run through with it. This is actually technically 2 days old now, except yesterday I sort of ended up crashing. I took the day off, watched Black Widow with my family, ate lots of takeaway, it was brilliant. So now I'm sort of catching up. Well, let's do it. The title says Designing the Canthan Written Language, so this is by Dahi-Im, who's a dev name I don't personally recognize. Maybe I'm a bit out of touch with that. Matthew Medina, who's been at the studio for many years. You will have heard me talk about in many different videos. One of my favorite things he's ever shown off was a tweet chain in which he showed early development concepts for the world map art of Tyria. And they looked completely crazy. Like, this guy made what Tyria looks like. Here, I'll show you some of his early ideas from that tweet chain back then. I love talking about that whenever his name comes up. And also Tracy West, which also is kind of a new name to me, but these guys presumably working a lot on the world building and setting stuff for Cantha. So just a little bit of background for you guys who weren't here at the launch of Guild Wars 2 and read some of those blog posts before the sequel game came out. There was this big article they did way back then. I think Matthew wrote that one too, in which they discussed the written language of Guild Wars 2, which they called New Crichton. I think they might have had an idea for Crichton in Guild Wars 1, and they had various symbols and like loose representations of languages for Tyria in the first game with the Prophecies campaign. But when they came to Guild Wars 2, they did a whole thing, and that's New Crichton, which is a full A to Z cipher for every letter of the alphabet. And it means while you're running around in Guild Wars 2, you'll see like this weird alien-looking language that you actually can learn, and you actually can translate. I mean, it is just a cipher for English, but it's cool. And I remember being really hyped hearing those details about New Crichton. Now fast forward to today, and this blog post I really do think is kind of like an homage and like a new edition of what we had all those years ago, because now we're looking at New Canthan. And so here's what they say. A brief history of the Canthan written language. When we first sat down to design the Canthan language as pre-production on Factions, so they're talking about years ago, guys. They're talking about 2006 here. We had actually planned to create both a written and a spoken language. An early documentation was authored with a full vocabulary, rules of grammar, and more. But as is often the case with ambitious creative endeavors, we soon realized that the level of work and fidelity that would be required to achieve our goals quickly grew far beyond the project's scope. And so we scaled the plan back to supporting a written language of around 100 symbols. So look at how incredibly ambitious they were with Factions. You can feel it when you go back to Guild Wars 1 and play Factions. Like, they have like the ancient Canthan dialect that gets spoken sometimes, and just such a vast body of supporting setting information. It's unreal. So they did make about 100 symbols. We aim to create 3 sets of 32 symbols, with each symbol representing a word, a concept, or an idea. These are called logograms. That would have the most usefulness to the world building needs of the expansion. Logographic systems can have complicated and diverse uses, and we set out to keep ours very simple and clear so that it would put the minimum amount of strain on the team, both for the artists that would use the symbols and for the quality assurance testers who would need to vet their usage. Now, yeah, you've got to remember, if they're going to make this whole language, they need people to verify that there aren't typos and issues. And typos and issues do slip through, but it's much easier to just change a little bit of text in the UI than it is to actually adjust like full-on art that people have painted onto things and stuff, I suppose. Anyway, stylistically, we chose a calligraphic approach using variable thickness of strokes and an expressive, though somewhat rigid aesthetic. The style was chosen to emphasize the nature of Cantha. And here, guys, I'll actually put on screen what we saw of the Canthan language from the Guild Wars 1 wiki, so you guys can see what they're talking about here. They go on to describe the Canthan people in this next sentence in a way that I never really kind of got a sense of in the first game, and I wonder if it's guiding them in the sequel. They say, the style was chosen to emphasize the nature of Cantha and its people, wonderfully spiritual and open-hearted, but with a great respect for order and structure. I mean, I kind of get that sense from the first game. Just as with the environment, which drew inspiration from a number of real-world analogues, Canthan symbols were not based on any one real-world language or writing system, but were developed to feel more like a cousin to any of them, with its unique ancestry and evolution grounded firmly in the fictional world of Tyria. So what they're trying to say here is we're not knocking off Japan, we're not knocking off Korea, we're not knocking off China. We're trying to do our own thing that's an amalgam to many things. When Guild Wars Factions released, the symbols that made it into the game, we finished 64 of the Plan 96, were well received by players as a wonderful way to immerse themselves in our fictional world even more, and this would inspire members of the development team to continue pursuing written languages as a way of strengthening world building across the franchise, i.e. that's probably what led to all the new Crichton stuff that we see has fed through the Guild Wars 2 era. I really feel like this last sentence they have here should be a hyperlink back to that old blog post. But the thing is, when they talked about that, it was on the old ArenaNet blog, which is not up anymore. You have to go to the Wayback Machine, and I don't know whether they're comfortable linking to the Wayback Machine or something. I don't know. New Canthan. As we set out to include the Canthan written language in Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons, we realized the differing needs of various teams would quickly increase the scope of our task far beyond what our small team of volunteers could handle, as well as place unmanageable burden on our QA teammates. Menus, books, manuscripts, and the like needed blocks of text about the many different subjects, which not only would need a staggering number of new characters to be created, but also grammatical structure that would then need to be learned and double-checked. That is, if we wanted to stay true to the original vision of a translatable Canthan written language. So, enter non-translatable Canthan. So, they're basically saying, look, the idea's cool, but we couldn't go far enough with it. I love this moment, by the way, in this paragraph, they mention menus, because one of the first New Crichton examples they gave, and one of the first things you see of New Crichton as a new player, starting a human, which is what the vast majority of MMO players would, tend to pick, is you walk outside a bar in Queensdale, and there's a menu there. And written in New Crichton, you can translate like what they're talking about. Some of the stuff that they're talking about on that menu for New Crichton is Canthan food. I think there's like rice balls they talk about, is it? Or some kind of alcohol? Anyway, I'm sure that that's what they're thinking of as they talk about it here in this this little paragraph. So, non-translatable Canthan. Not necessarily the most exciting thing, but they say non-translatable Canthan is based on Hangul, the Korean alphabet, which uses a system of vowel letters and consonant letters to create syllabic blocks. The system was chosen as a relatively easy way to create many new symbols that look distinct from those that are translatable and yet are still a part of their family. There are 5 vowel letters, 10 consonants, so we can see them here. The A, E, I, O, U at the top, I suppose, and then you've got a limited selection of consonants below. These must be combined in one of 2 ways in order to create words. So you can go a consonant and a vowel. So you can see the consonants like on the top for this leftmost image, and then the vowel is underneath, for example. Or you can surround a vowel with consonants, and you'll see that the symbols then start looking a lot more complicated. While not as complex as Hangul itself, which has additional combinations, non-translatable Canthan nevertheless produced enough new letters to allow us to fill End of Dragons with a beautiful written language that felt grounded and representative of a forward-facing Cantha. So I don't really get this, guys. I mean, if what we're essentially getting is like AS or TUT or whatever, like the equivalent would be, how does that then express any meaning, really? A sophisticated enough meaning to be representative of a forward-facing Cantha? I guess the idea is it's purely like an aesthetic typography type thing, or it's that you'll find recurring elements in like happy, lovey words appear in other words, and then you'll know that, there's some kind of cross meaning going on. They kind of explain it that way at the end here. Anyway, while the non-translatable Canthan would do wonders for filling in books, we still felt the need for a few new logographic words that players could learn to recognize and translate. The new set of symbols for our return to Cantha had several goals. We wanted to maintain some of the shape language created in factions, as well as focus on words that would get a lot of use on props in our expansion. We carried some symbols for various NPCs that would appear, as well as things you would expect to see on neighborhood signs such as open or welcome. The symbol for open specifically used inspiration from air, light, up, night, and day. If you look closely at those earlier words that are tied to the concept of open space and times of day, you begin to see the smaller accent mark can be used to emphasize direction or sun placement. Thus, we went with something that means approximately outside air. And when you are opening a building, what are you doing but letting in the outside world? Welcome continues some of those same concepts. With this symbol, we wanted to say not only is the location open, but that the opening is done with affection. To create this concept, we took the symbol for open and combined it with a recurring piece found in symbols such as love, brother, and sister to indicate the additional concept of treating another as family. We will start sharing more of these new symbols before Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons arrives. And then they have this image here to kind of represent a little bit of what they're talking about. I really love how sophisticated and complex and nuanced a lot of this looks, and how much work and love and passion the team seems to have put into this. I don't know how much, for me as a consumer, this will actually really come through, but the fact that they talk about it in a blog post, so you know that that passion's there, you know that that talent's there anyway, I think really does do a lot. But my big takeaway really from this post here, guys, aside from just being enthusiastic about the exploration of an authentically delivered setting and so on, is I really feel like they're leaning a lot into this idea of the Canthans being very nice, family-loving, warm people, you know, which is kind of different to what I was expecting. Going into this blog post, reading the movement of the world, looking at the Ministry of Purity, looking at their xenophobia and their isolationism over the years, I was expecting a much more cold-hearted people and a much more brutalist people, maybe who are very free to subjugate others and have been perhaps subjugated themselves over the years, that have made them quite cold. But everything I'm seeing in this blog post seems to be that the devs don't want to present a continent like that at all. They want to present, you know, a very loving, very open, very nice feeling peoples and society. You never know with stuff like this. Maybe we'll get a bit of both worlds. I actually don't think it's a mistake either, for what it's worth. I know quite often I argue for kind of a darker tone and kind of a colder environment. But I think if the overall setting is quite a welcoming, warm place that we actually learn to love, then you know what you're fighting for a bit better, and then the main story can go to the dark places, but you have to kind of care and enjoy the people that you're around, right? And so I kind of see why they might go for that. I actually feel like through the POF eras, with the relentless Awakened, and like especially in Season 4, it kind of felt a bit too drab for a bit too long, and maybe that's what they're trying to sidestep a little bit with Cantha, if I'm reading into any of the kind of direction of this post correctly, that is. But they have, guys, that's a little bit of End of Dragons Daily, a really lovely blog post. I know it won't be everyone's cup of tea, but really fascinating to me. I read it a couple of days ago and I knew I wanted to do a video about it, so here it is. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Tomorrow there'll probably be another new player guide. Please start dropping comments and questions again down here. I want to figure out what topic I want to do, any kind of ideas you guys have about End of Dragons at all that you want to talk about, untouched topics, let me know, because then I can start gathering them for a more regular Q&A episode as well. And finally, as we round out, if you're watching this video when it's very new, you'll probably find I'm live in Guild Wars 2 right now. Check the comments, I've probably got a pinned one. Check the description for a link to my Twitch. I'll be raiding, so that should be pretty fun. I'd love to see as many of you guys over there as is possible. So thanks, guys, and I'll see you for the next one very soon. Take care now.